also the time to choose Canada.
A Buy Canadian initiative.
And Canadians seem to be listening.
Canadian dairy. Oh, Canadian flour. Oh, local spring mix from the Greenbelt.
I'm trying to look and buy everything Canadian.
I'm just looking for the cheapest price right now.
Very conscious. Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at the labels, making sure they're made in Canada or Mexico.
The website Made in Canada, which lists Canadian products, saw so much traffic it overwhelmed the site.
For years, we were probably only getting maybe 5,000 or 10,000 people a month who read our resource. And then, the last few days, it's probably been, 50, 100,000 people in a day.
The simplest way to know if what you're buying is Canadian is to read the labels.
The golden standard is Product of Canada. Product of Canada means
a seismic shift in North American trade relations has sent shockwaves through global markets. Canada's strategic alignment with the European Union, designed to counter Trump's latest tariffs, threatens to unravel decades of integrated auto industry supply chains. With billions in cross-border trade at stake, this isn't just another trade dispute. It's a potential revolution in North American manufacturing that could permanently alter the continent's economic landscape. The catalyst for this transformation came with Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2024. His America First ideology, once dismissed by many as campaign rhetoric, has evolved into concrete policy that's systematically dismantling decades of carefully crafted trade relationships. The president's deep skepticism toward free trade agreements marks a dramatic departure from Washington's long-standing bipartisan consensus, replacing collaborative economics with confrontational diplomacy. This simmering tension reached boiling point when Trump announced a sweeping 25% tariff on all Canadian goods entering the United States. The implications of this move extend far beyond simple border taxes. It threatens to disrupt everything from raw material supplies to finished products, potentially triggering price increases that would ultimately hit American consumers hardest. Adding fuel to this economic fire, Trump proposed an additional 10% tariff on Canadian energy exports, directly threatening the vast network of pipelines and transmission lines that form the backbone of North America's energy infrastructure. But what transformed this trade dispute into a diplomatic crisis was Trump's provocative suggestion that Canada might become America's 51st state. Citing a disputed $200 billion annual trade deficit, he argued that Canadian integration into the United States would benefit both nations. This figure, however, has been challenged by economists who point out that it likely includes factors beyond simple trade imbalances, such as U.S. defense spending that indirectly benefits Canada. To provide a window for negotiation, the U.S. administration established a 30-day tariff suspension period. This diplomatic pause was intended to allow for discussions about border security and drug trafficking concerns, with Trump specifically highlighting the flow of fentanyl into the U.S. However, this justification rings hollow given U.S. Customs data showing that less than 1% of fentanyl imports originate from Canada. Canada's response was both swift and unequivocal. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's categorical rejection of U.S. statehood suggestions, declaring there wasn't a snowball's chance in hell of such an outcome, rallied domestic support around Canadian sovereignty. Beyond diplomatic protests, Canada announced strategically targeted retaliatory tariffs, focusing on products from key Republican-leaning states like Kentucky bourbon and Florida oranges. This calculated approach, reminiscent of Canada's response to the 2018 steel and aluminum tariffs, aims to create internal U.S. pressure for policy reconsideration. Before we delve deeper into the far-reaching implications of this trade war, take a moment to subscribe to our channel for ongoing coverage of this developing economic crisis. The story unfolding before us isn't just about tariffs and trade. It's about the fundamental restructuring of North American economic relationships that could reshape global commerce for generations to come.
For 3 days, Canadians have been hearing messages like these.
Now is also the time to choose Canada.
A Buy Canadian initiative.
And Canadians seem to be listening.
Canadian dairy. Oh, Canadian flour. Oh, local spring mix from the Greenbelt.
I'm trying to look and buy everything Canadian.
I'm just looking for the cheapest price right now.
Very conscious. Yeah, definitely. I'm looking at the labels, making sure they're made in Canada or Mexico.
The website Made in Canada, which lists Canadian products, saw so much traffic it overwhelmed the site.
For years, we were probably only getting maybe 5 or 10,000 people a month who read our resource. And then, the last few days, it's probably been, 50, 100,000 people in a day.
The simplest way to know if what you're buying is Canadian is to read the labels.
The golden standard is product of Canada. Product of Canada means it's manufactured in Canada using ingredients from Canada.
The Canadian public's rejection of American goods has evolved from spontaneous protest to organized economic resistance. Social media campaigns promoting domestic products have transformed shopping habits overnight, while decisions by provincial liquor control boards to remove American alcohol from their shelves threaten to eliminate nearly $1 billion in annual U.S. sales. Even tourism faces disruption as Canadians cancel U.S. vacation plans, choosing to spend their dollars at home. But beyond these grassroots actions, a more profound shift is taking shape. Canada's strategic pivot toward the European Union builds upon the foundation of CETA, their existing trade agreement that has already boosted bilateral trade by 60% since 2017. With tariffs eliminated on 98% of goods between Canada and the EU, this partnership offers what the U.S. relationship increasingly cannot: predictability and mutual respect. Recent high-level meetings between Prime Minister Trudeau and EU leadership in Brussels signal more than routine diplomacy. As European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen welcomes deeper cooperation, both sides recognize an unprecedented opportunity to reshape traditional trade alliances.
Indeed, the story between the European Union and Canada is a story of beneficial investment and trade. It is the story of good allies, and it is the story of trusted friends. And trust is very much needed in an unpredictable world. I'm very much looking forward to discuss the topics of the G7 presidency of Canada, be it the steadfast and unwavering support for Ukraine, be it the decarbonization of our economies and the question how we increase the competitiveness and move towards circularity, and of course also the topic of trade. Trade can be very beneficial and lead to a win-win situation. CETA has proven it. Indeed, since we have CETA, trade and investment on both sides have increased by 66%. This is excellent and beneficial for both sides. It is good for the consumers, it is good for the business, and it is good for the people on.
The emerging partnership between Canada and the European Union extends far beyond traditional trade agreements. At its heart lies a strategic alignment in critical minerals and clean energy that could fundamentally reshape global supply chains. Canada's vast natural resources, combined with the EU's aggressive push toward green technology, create a powerful synergy that threatens America's technological dominance. This collaboration centers on securing crucial materials for the next generation of manufacturing. Through a comprehensive raw materials partnership, both parties aim to reduce their dependence on existing suppliers, a move that could significantly impact U.S. access to essential resources. The focus on minerals like nickel, cobalt, and lithium isn't coincidental. These materials form the backbone of electric vehicle production and renewable energy technologies, sectors where both Canada and the EU seek leadership. But the partnership's ambitions reach beyond resource sharing. Negotiations are underway for an unprecedented EU-Canada security and defense agreement that would transform military cooperation across the Atlantic. The proposed partnership envisions joint naval exercises, shared defense industry intelligence, and mutual access to military facilities for repairs and resupply. This potential agreement signals a broader shift in global defense dynamics, particularly as questions arise about the reliability of traditional U.S. security commitments. The economic implications of this deepening relationship could ripple through every sector of North American industry. As Canadian businesses increasingly look to European markets as alternatives to U.S. trade, established supply chains face unprecedented disruption. Nowhere is this threat more acute than in the automotive sector, where decades of integration have created a delicate web of cross-border dependencies. The North American auto industry exemplifies the complexity of modern manufacturing, with parts and vehicles often crossing borders multiple times during production. This intricate dance of components and assembly has historically given U.S. automakers a competitive advantage. However, as Canada strengthens its European ties, this advantage could quickly become a vulnerability.
Well, we need to be united, strong, and smart. We need to recognize this is a critical moment for our country. We need to recognize that we can get through this and we can win, but we can only do that if we do the right things. So what I think we need to do today is publish a detailed retaliation list. It needs to be big, bigger than our retaliation ultimately will be. It should be $200 billion worth, and it needs to be very specific, because what we need to recognize is President Trump doesn't really care about us. He cares about Americans. And so we need to use the market power that Canada has as the largest export market for the U.S. to activate those internal stakeholders in the U.S. and get them to say to the president, wait a minute, this is going to hurt us.
Is there not a risk, however, that retaliatory tariffs will only turn up the temperature with this president instead of using diplomacy to cool it down and to find a way out of this?
The potential disruption to the U.S. auto industry reveals a broader transformation in North American economic power dynamics. With billions of dollars in vehicles and parts crossing the border annually, even minor changes to this trade relationship could trigger massive ripple effects. Plant closures in manufacturing hubs across Michigan, Ohio, and Indiana loom as real possibilities if Canadian suppliers pivot toward European markets or retaliatory tariffs drive up component costs. Yet this realignment between Canada and the EU extends beyond economics. It challenges the very notion of U.S.-led North American prosperity. As this new partnership develops, other nations watch closely, recognizing an opportunity to reduce their own dependence on U.S.-centric trade networks. This shift could encourage countries worldwide to explore alternatives to traditional American-dominated economic relationships. However, this pivot toward Europe isn't without significant hurdles. Geographic distance poses a particular challenge for industries built on just-in-time delivery systems. The complexities of aligning with EU regulatory standards present another obstacle for Canadian businesses, requiring substantial investments in new processes and technologies. Moreover, the EU's own internal divisions and often lengthy decision-making procedures could complicate efforts to deepen these economic ties. Expert opinions on the long-term impact vary widely. Some analysts predict a catastrophic crisis for U.S. manufacturers, arguing that the integrated nature of North American markets makes significant disruption inevitable. They point to potential losses in global market share as higher production costs make American vehicles less competitive against European and Asian rivals. Others see the industry's proven adaptability as a source of resilience, noting that automakers have already navigated significant challenges, from the electric vehicle transition to ongoing supply chain disruptions. This economic chess game has drawn Mexico into a precarious position. As the third partner in USMCA, Mexican officials must carefully balance existing North American relationships against potential opportunities in European markets. Their response could further complicate the future of continental trade integration, potentially accelerating the fracturing of long-established economic patterns.
President Trump's decision to whack tariffs on American allies and rivals has seen a weekend of retaliation. Canada announcing its own tariffs, Mexico warning of some of their own, and China set to take their case to the World Trade Organization. But for the White House, it's time to double down.
Between full-scale trade war and diplomatic resolution lies a more complex possibility: the partial implementation of tariffs alongside continuous negotiations. This scenario could create a prolonged period of economic uncertainty, forcing businesses and governments to constantly adapt to shifting trade conditions. As this new reality unfolds, one thing becomes clear: the era of taking U.S.-Canada economic partnership for granted has ended.
I am glad that we're pushing back against China and Mexico when it comes to fentanyl poisoning of America. I am glad we're putting everybody on notice that the old way of doing business is over.
As Mexico prepares retaliatory tariffs, President Claudia Sheinbaum spoke today with Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who announced a 25% tax on $20 billion worth of U.S. goods, warning Americans of the costs.
Tariffs against Canada will put your jobs at risk.
The world's reaction to Trump's sweeping tariffs has unleashed an unprecedented wave of economic retaliation. Canada's $30 billion tariff package, Mexico's mysterious Plan B, and China's WTO challenge represent just the opening moves in what could become a devastating global trade war. Economic experts warn these escalating tensions could erase hundreds of billions from the world economy. Behind Trump's aggressive trade stance lies a complex web of justifications. The White House has invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977 to rapidly implement a 25% levy on Canadian and Mexican goods, alongside a 10% tariff on Chinese imports. This dramatic action draws legitimacy from a range of national security concerns, particularly focused on border security and drug trafficking. The administration's fact sheet paints a stark picture. Over 10 million attempted illegal border crossings under the previous administration, including an alarming increase in Chinese nationals and individuals on terror watch lists. Officials point to rising encounters along the Canadian border as evidence of a spreading crisis, while highlighting the seizure of more than 21,000 pounds of fentanyl, reportedly just a fraction of what crosses U.S. borders annually. As financial markets brace for impact, one question looms large. Are we witnessing the beginning of an unstoppable economic meltdown? The international response to Trump's tariffs has revealed a fundamental shift in global economic diplomacy. Mexico, despite initial restraint, has emerged as an increasingly vocal opponent of U.S. trade policy. President Claudia Sheinbaum's rejection of White House accusations about cartel connections signals more than diplomatic protest. It marks a growing willingness to challenge U.S. economic dominance. Her calls for a public health approach to the fentanyl crisis, rather than punitive trade measures, highlight the deepening divide in North American relations. Meanwhile, China's response demonstrates sophisticated economic strategy. By announcing their intention to challenge U.S. actions through the World Trade Organization while simultaneously preparing countermeasures, Beijing positions itself as both a defender of international trade norms and a powerful adversary. The reminder of being first to classify all fentanyl variants as controlled substances effectively undermines a key justification for U.S. tariffs. The European response adds another layer of complexity to this unfolding crisis. The European Commission's warning about the destructive nature of these tariffs carries particular weight given their growing alliance with Canada. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's observation that global trade has enabled prosperity for all serves as a pointed critique of America's turn toward protectionism. Financial markets have already begun pricing in the potential for prolonged economic disruption. The Japanese yen's record low, coupled with the dramatic decline in Mexican peso and Canadian dollar values, suggests investors are bracing for a fundamental restructuring of global trade patterns. Market analysts point to the unprecedented speed of Canadian and Mexican retaliation as a particularly troubling sign, indicating the potential for rapid escalation that could trigger a sharp contraction in global commerce. The consequences for traditional supply chains could be severe. Scott Lincecum's grenade analogy aptly describes the potential impact on automotive manufacturing, where components might cross borders multiple times during production. With 1 in 5 U.S. vehicles assembled in Canada or Mexico, the intricate dance of cross-border manufacturing faces unprecedented disruption. The agricultural sector stands as another potential casualty of this expanding trade war. Mexico's $1.5 billion meat export market to the U.S. and its dominance in fresh produce supply, providing half of America's avocados, tomatoes, and berries, illustrates the deep interconnections that these tariffs threaten to sever. The resulting supply shortages and price increases could send shockwaves through U.S. consumer markets, potentially driving inflation higher just as the economy showed signs of stabilizing.
Europe is equally vital for America, as we Americans cannot face the global challenges alone. I would like to echo what our President Roberta Metsola said after the elections. Our mentality is no longer America elects and Europe reacts, but Europe acts.